Hello everyone, welcome back to another instalment of the Warwick F1 Show. It has been a couple of days since we witnessed the events of the Austrian Grand Prix, which saw finally the hot pot that we call the Verstappen-Norris battle finally boil over as we saw them collide on lap 64, leading to Norris having to retire his car and Verstappen dropping back to P5. Meanwhile, the both Brits, but the Mercedes driver of George Russell sails past both of them and claims his second career victory. Very unlikely with him sitting in P3 up until the lap 64 collision. And it also saw Haas with one of their great performances, I'd say one of their best performances of the season, finishing P6 and P8 respectively. Certainly one of Hülkenberg's best finish in that Haas car, collecting up a very nice amount of points for the American team. We shall be talking about all of this and much more that unfolded on that weekend on today's episode. I'm once again joined by Chinmay and Will Kingswood. How are you guys doing? What did you think of that race? Obviously, we could probably split it up really into kind of prior to lap 40 or 50 or so. I think it was lap 50, I think. Basically before or after Verstappen's slow stop. And really two completely different races. I'm sure many of us from before lap 50 were saying it's a pretty uneventful race. And then all of a sudden it just came alive. And so it was pretty good in the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of going off that trend we've seen for the past few races where there is a Verstappen and Norris battle, that Verstappen seems to gain a bit of time at the start. Either that's through maybe Norris not being able to get past someone, but even so, he sort of gains like eight or so seconds on Norris and on the rest of the grid. And then into the second half of the race, you start to see the McLaren come back. And I think we saw that again today with where before the slow stop, Verstappen, is kind of out there in front. Maybe Norris is going to close up on him right at the end to kind of challenge him for the win. But the slow stop meant they were right together with about 20 laps to go. And obviously, as you mentioned, Callum, that went badly, I think it's fair to say, for the two drivers. And obviously, we'll come on to that. But it wasn't the most eventful race before that. So if we're doing our ratings out of 10, I'd probably give it, I'd give it maybe a 6, I think, even with the battle. And obviously, again, we'll come on to talk about that. Even with the battle, there wasn't really much going on anywhere else. And I think while it did end well, that was very much payment for the start of the race, which wasn't exactly the most interesting.
Yeah, I think I agree with Will there. I'd probably give it 6.5, 7. I think just because that battle alone was just really intriguing, and the fact that it was a battle for the lead and whatnot. Obviously, yeah, we did have that sort of middle part of the race, which was a bit boring. Obviously, we saw Max running away with it. Kind of is going to look like business as usual until, Red Bull did a rare pit stop mishap, and yeah, we had a good battle. Obviously. Yeah, what happened is not the most ideal thing in the world. We'll come on to it, I'm pretty sure anyway. So, yeah, we'll talk about it more then. But yeah, I think overall it was a better race than I anticipated. But yeah, it's what it is.
Oh, well, you guys have gone completely separate from the route I was going to go down to of like thinking about an 8 or 9 out of 10. I mean, yeah, we have to acknowledge that it was a pretty boring race to begin with. It was no one would have blamed any of us for thinking that it was just going to be the usual Verstappen dominance. He was building up a very solid 6 to 8 second gap, and I was thinking even if Norris did have more of a pace, especially because I think what played a very big factor into it is that Norris and the McLaren saved 2 new sets of mediums for the end of the race compared to the Red Bulls, which saved 2 new sets of hard tyres, which obviously from runners such as Leclerc found that the hards weren't working in the conditions or not working as well as the mediums in the conditions that the race was being held. But still, I think around that time I was just thinking it's going to be the same as Spain and races before that, where Norris, it looks like he's building up a gap, but then he's maybe not going to get there, or it's just one thing to get there, but another thing to overtake. And it's just going to be the same thing again, where our hopes are just dropped. But after that Verstappen pit stop and the mistake, the lockup he made as well into turn 4, it really changed up the dynamic of the race. And I think from then on, I'm able to forgive the first kind of 40, 50 laps, because we actually got our first proper prolonged battle for the lead between two drivers. And I guess you could say, yes, maybe for Spain, we did kind of have that with the strategy battles, but actually seeing it live on track with our eyes battling out. And obviously Verstappen does create a nice bit of entertainment for us with his lack of respect for the rules, I guess we should say. But I certainly thought it was very enjoyable. But we're going to have to come on to that issue first with what happened. Basically, just to catch up, if for some reason people listening haven't heard, after a slow stop from Red Bull on, it was around lap 50, I don't know the exact number, but yeah, it meant that Norris was about 3 seconds behind Verstappen. He closed up by about 4 seconds from the gap that he originally had, and a Verstappen lockup, as well as the better pace of the McLaren on the medium tyres, meant that Norris was right at the back of Verstappen. And Verstappen was doing his usual style of defending, which is essentially moving under braking, or which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. And this led to what was inevitably going to happen, a crash on lap 64 going into turn 3, meaning that both drivers got a puncture. Norris had to retire the car. Verstappen obviously had to come in for a pit stop, which meant that he was only in P5. And obviously that meant that Russell could sail through. So, let me ask the very obvious question to you guys first, which is, who is to blame?
Right. So, for me, there's 4 separate incidents that I think you could talk about. There's one where there's the first. So the first one is Norris kind of looks at a move and Verstappen moves a little bit under braking to block him off. They both get through the corner. No one kind of overtakes each other. The second one is very much a Norris sails it up the inside, goes off the track. Verstappen goes off the track, keeps the position, but then Norris gives the position back at the end of turn 4. Then the third one is Norris, again, a bit of a dive bomb, stays on the track but forces Verstappen off the track. Verstappen drives across the escape or the runoff area, comes back on and stays in first place, or Norris stays on the track and just continues to drive. And then a lap later, we do see the one that caused a puncture for both of the drivers. And for me, it's very difficult because I think one of those I think is fine in terms of the conduct, and that would be the third one for me, because we have seen time and again Verstappen do exactly the same thing as Norris doing there.
I think it was in 2019 that Verstappen made the move against Leclerc, literally the exact same scenario, same corner. He did the exact same thing.
Well, 2019 Austria, another one I remember, I guess 2021 Abu Dhabi, where Verstappen does come from quite far back. He kind of hits the edge of the corner, and obviously that leaves Hamilton nowhere to go but straight across, and there were discussions about whether that was okay from either Hamilton or Verstappen. So that one's fine to me, and I think if that had been the final incident, we'd be discussing something a bit different. The second one for me is definitely Norris's fault. If you're going to dive bomb, you've got to make the corner. You can't just go around forcing other drivers off the track while you also go off the track, I guess. But the first one and the last one are probably Verstappen's fault for me. I guess we have the rule that you can't move under braking. We have it because Max Verstappen, back in the early stages of his career, was very much kind of moving under braking a little bit. And I think when you see it on the inside, obviously they're going towards the corner. It's a bit different, but moving under braking on the outside, and I know Norris has kind of chucked it up the outside, but he's entitled to do that. That's a racing move. And I saw comparisons to, I think, Verstappen on the outside with it was either Sainz or Leclerc a few years ago, where the Ferrari hasn't given him as much room. But crucially, I think the Ferrari is still going in a straight line, whereas Verstappen, like admittedly, and probably better, gives Norris an entire car's width. But then Norris, he's out the outside, he's entitled to space, and Verstappen just kind of moves across on him, and then obviously that's what causes the collision. I think the thing that's probably caused the most kind of discussion is the fact that there are 4 incidents, and a few of them are maybe more on Norris, a few of them are maybe more on Verstappen. So you can always kind of pick and choose the ones that you want to take and say, oh, this is all Verstappen's fault, this is all Norris's fault. And for me, it's just a lot more kind of difficult to judge who was at fault. And ultimately, I just think it was bad kind of driving from the both of them.
No, I think the 4th incident, Verstappen, I'm guessing his goal was to try and squeeze Norris to the left as much as possible so that he'd get a bad exit, but just went too far with it. And overdid it. And I think for the second incident with Norris, obviously, yes, that was, I think with the second incident, it wasn't anything really to do with Verstappen, I'd say. But then I wouldn't say it's necessarily Norris's fault. I think it's just a mistake made from him on his part that he's just completely misjudged the corner. But like we said, he has, as far as I was, or as far as what I would say, I think he has a complete right to do that if he wants to send it down the inside. I mean, it's what Verstappen's teammate in 2018, he was literally defined for sending it up the inside, and we were absolutely fine with that. So I don't see any problem with Norris doing that either. Chinmay, what did you take on that incident? Are you kind of thinking similar things as well, or would you give more of a blame to Norris, for example?
To be honest, I think on similar lines to Will. To be honest, but yeah, and especially with the sort of the last incident, and so like Max literally he does veer left where like does cause the puncture. It's obviously 100% his fault in my opinion, and then and obviously deserves a penalty for that and whatnot, and you know, but yeah, I guess also with the second and third one, you know, when Norris doesn't cleanly overtake Verstappen and also forces him off the track. I do feel like Norris had a bit of a wasted opportunity, in my opinion, because the car did have the pace to overtake, and I do feel that, especially if that the energy management just wasn't there. But again, obviously, I'm not an F1 driver. I'm not qualified to say what he should and shouldn't have done. But
I think Norris seemed to want to keep waiting until turn 4 to get the move done, but he never could do it in turn 4. He really had the pace over Verstappen to make up time into turns 1 and 3, and it seemed that he just couldn't get the move done then, and then by the time he got to turn 4, the opportunity was over anyway. So maybe Norris. So you're thinking that Norris maybe should have done more to overtake him earlier and not lead to the banging wheels, because ultimately as well, if say they didn't crash and Norris did get through, then with the extra opportunities that he's missed to overtake, then that's him basically like ruining his tires, and that means that Verstappen might have been able to stay with him within that 5-second gap and ultimately take the race victory.
100%, because especially like because especially I believe I can't remember if this was early in the sprint as well, because obviously this was a sprint weekend, where I think when Norris did make the overtake at turn 3, and then Max obviously managed to overtake him later on or something like that, or I can't remember if it was Norris or not. And
yes, it was when Norris got him at turn 3, and then Verstappen kind of went back up the inside at turn 4, and then that pushed Norris out wide and meant Piastri got past him for P2.
Yeah, because and then I suppose there was also the Max Verstappen factor that, you know, if you're going to dive up the inside, he's just going to turn into you. You know,
even after they got a puncture, he was still squeezing Norris onto the grass on the run down to turn 4. I was just thinking that is tantrum. If you didn't know, if you say, right, what driver is that on the grid that's doing that, you would say Max Verstappen.
Oh yeah, he does it.
The Max Verstappen of 2018, yes.
I'm surprised that's not been looked at a little more. I think
That squeezing onto the grass.
Yeah, I think the problem I've got is that everything appears to have kind of been bundled together. I think you've got to look at it on a case by case basis. Like, this wasn't just one incident; it was like 3 or 4 that I think all need to be looked at. And I think really the problem is a lot of the drivers know that Max isn't exactly the most compromising when it comes to being overtaken. And I think that has meant that their battles between Max and other drivers, perhaps with the exception of Leclerc, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is, but for a lot of drivers between them and Max, it becomes very different, it becomes a different ball game.
No, I completely agree, because I remember watching, I think this is something that Anthony Davidson identified when he was analysing the kind of instance. And on the second instant that we had, there's a very subtle difference as to how Norris approached the corner. He kind of, rather than squeezing, I guess, Max to the left, exactly what Verstappen was trying to do in the fourth incident, he stays very cautiously to the right, which you think maybe he's lost confidence in the fact that they're not going to collide because it's Verstappen and because he has that reputation, and as a result is having to compromise his line and slow down further, and maybe that's what led to the lockup on the second incident.
I mean, it's the thing is, over the last 2 years, Verstappen has been so far ahead of everyone and in a much better car, at least for the second half of 2022 and definitely for 2023. He's been in a much better car than everyone else. And obviously he is an incredible driver, so he's able to use that car to the best of its abilities. But this has meant either A, he's so far ahead of everyone that he never has to do any wheel-to-wheel driving, or B, when he is for some reason behind someone, he can just kind of breeze past them. It's not a quick battle. And if he is in the battle, he probably back out and just do it the next lap because he's got the time to. But that has kind of meant that he hasn't had to do any proper wheel-to-wheel driving for at least, I think, 18 months. I think, obviously, the last time there's probably been a really big Verstappen wheel-to-wheel battle was back in maybe Bahrain and Jeddah in 2022 with Charles Leclerc. And for me, that's always been Verstappen's big down point, in that when he does battle wheel-to-wheel, more often than not, and I'm not saying it's every single time because there are definitely instances, like with those Leclerc battles back in Bahrain and Jeddah, but more often than not, it ends with one driver being forced off the track by someone or someone else. It ends with someone having damage. And I don't think that is the correct, or it doesn't seem like a good way to race. When you look at maybe other drivers, obviously, perhaps thinking about the older ones like your Alonsos and your Hamiltons, and maybe now drivers that retire where it can be. But with them, it was kind of the exception was contact, whereas with Verstappen, it's kind of the exception, at least for me, the exceptional has always been it's a clean battle. And I think that I don't know how to feel about it. And I think...
Do you feel like maybe then because I think when Verstappen came out after that slow stop and he obviously locked up, is that the first time maybe that we've seen Verstappen properly nervous in a while? Because obviously we've talked a lot about, like, I think I've certainly said that over the past few years, I think that we've seen Verstappen mature, or we would say that we've seen Verstappen mature quite a bit since, say, how he was in 2018. But is that because, for the most part, the Red Bull car has been so dominant that he hasn't had to battle anyone? And that's why that in this occasion, when he has had to battle someone, it's almost like we're looking back 6 years ago to the 2018 Verstappen, where he was just, he would do everything but concede a position, including crash the car.
Yeah, I mean, it's so I think it's difficult to say, and I don't want to put anything, I don't want to say anything too dramatic now, because at the end of the day, it could be a one-off. It could be, we'll go into the rest of the season and Verstappen and Norris have the greatest battles F1 has ever seen. But it's the fact that it can be compared to the Verstappen of old, and it does appear that whenever Verstappen seems to be under pressure, he does kind of regress a little, and we've seen that again now. It raises questions, and I think to be fair, you have to kind of wait and see if it happens again. And I think if we go into Silverstone and maybe it happens again, if we go into Hungary or Belgium or any other track we go to later on in the season, and we do see kind of these collisions again, you do, I think, have to question whether we have seen a kind of more mature Verstappen, or whether it is the kind of circumstances that he was put in have kind of allowed him to shape that perception because he was either so far ahead or was in a car that was quick enough to overtake everyone that he didn't have to do these sorts of things.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think the next few races will tell, and certainly, well, I guess you could say that the only other time, apart from 2021, that he's actually been challenged really is from before that, maybe 2020, 2019 as such. But I just quickly, we've talked a lot about Verstappen in terms of this incident, but I would like to talk a little bit about Norris, because a lot of people are going to obviously be hoping that we get this kind of battle for Silverstone and for races that lead on to the rest of the season, because it's exciting. It's one of the first proper battles we've had between drivers, really, I guess you could say, since 2021 between Hamilton and Verstappen. But the thing I thought, at least before the incident, I remember Will Biddles was on the episode last time discussing the Austria preview, and something he said, which I remembered actually going into it, is that the difference between Verstappen and Norris is that Norris has a mistake in him. Because we were talking about this before the episode started, and we kind of came to an agreement that the McLarens and the Red Bulls now, the pace of the car is very similar. So it's maybe more now down to the driver than it has ever been before between these battles. And something that I thought is that, like, realistically speaking, if Verstappen hadn't collided on lap 64, all of a sudden Lando has got a 5-second penalty, and then Verstappen can be a lot calmer. He can maybe let Norris by, but just start following him. And I think ultimately, if Verstappen hadn't been Verstappen, he could have easily won that race, because it was a mistake from Norris that caused him to lock up his tyres, caused him to go off the track, and then he got a penalty for track limits. And I just think that's maybe the one aspect which isn't going to turn this into, say, like a title fight like we saw with Hamilton and Verstappen, is because unfortunately Norris does still have that little bit of inexperience, maybe, because I think ultimately, again, like I said, if the incident hadn't happened on lap 64, then suddenly it's all going to Verstappen. And we thought that after the second incident, it's all going to go to Verstappen's way now, and it's all going to be the same result that we were expecting, because Norris he's made a mistake into that corner and he's going to be given a penalty. And luckily he wasn't delivered that penalty until after the lap 64 incident happened. So do you think maybe that's what's going to stop an out-and-out battle in the next couple of races, because Norris is still a little bit inexperienced compared to Verstappen?
I would say yeah, because to be honest, obviously this is probably the first time since coming to F1 that he's actually, being able to compete for race wins on a regular basis. And obviously, yeah, he's been in F1. This is his 6th or 7th season now, Formula One. So obviously, he's had experience in Formula One, but most of it has been in the midfield. And from what I see, racing in the midfield and racing for race wins are two different scenarios altogether. And, yes, he's had obviously experience fighting for championships. I mean, he was there in Formula 2, for example, in 2018, competing against Alex Albon, George Russell and a lot for that title in his rookie season as well. But But then again, you're fighting as Max Verstappen, so who, yes, he's a similar age to Lando Norris, but he's been in the title races, or at least fighting for wins on a regular basis for almost his entire stint in Formula One now, especially since 2019. And yeah, so obviously we all know how good Verstappen is, and arguably he is a better driver as well. So I guess there's that pressure element as well that probably is sort of haunting Norris a little bit. And at the moment, I'm kind of seeing a lot of comparisons to Charles Leclerc, because obviously we know Leclerc's got that special something in him as well on his day, but we also know how error prone he is and how bad he is at cracking under pressure at times. So I guess, especially because it's still early on in sort of like Norris's dominant era, or at least the peak of his career. We've only just entered it, to be honest, I would say. So, the sky's the limit to see what happens. But at the moment, I would say it is just inexperience and knowing what to do under that sort of pressure, and basically making those sort of race-winning decisions. And Max has just had that better experience of it.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I think you've got a Max Verstappen who has he's had a race winning car since 2017. He's had a championship winning car since 2021 now. And when you're driving at the front, you just get used to winning. Like it does become part of that mentality. You know what it takes to win. Whereas when you're Lando Norris, like he's now had about a year, I think, or coming up to the next race, obviously that's when McLaren started to perform at the front. He's now had a year of being able to achieve podiums, and since I'd say about Imola, maybe a race or two before, he now has a car that is capable of winning, but he is in a situation where he is competing with arguably one of the best drivers that F1 has ever seen in Max Verstappen. He is still new to this scenario where realistically, if everything goes well, he will be standing on the top step of the podium. And I think that just does take time to develop. I don't think it's going to cost us battles necessarily, but I think when you've got a combination of relatively not inexperienced Norris, but inexperienced at the front Norris, and the Max Verstappen, who I think, regardless of your opinion of him, is quite an uncompromising racer when there's a race win on the line. I think when you see those two things kind of interact with one another, and I guess I was saying it last time when obviously will this be a one-off? Personally, I think when you see Norris and Verstappen where they are at in their careers, when they are near each other on the track, I do think you're gonna see this happen again. I just think you're gonna see collisions, and I think at some point there's two ways that can resolve itself. It can be Verstappen can mellow out, I guess, at the front, but as we've seen time and time again, it doesn't appear that that's ever going to happen. I think that's fair. He's an uncompromising racer. He wants to fight for wins. Or Norris is going to improve. And obviously, I think as time goes on, Norris will start to understand how to beat Max Verstappen and start to do so. And I mean, when you look back to 2021, Lewis Hamilton was finding it difficult. And at that point, he was a 7-time world champion. It's not easy to beat Verstappen. And it is probably just going to take time for Norris to figure it out and to start to get the measure of the Red Bull.
I think certainly this race compared to others, the drivers will learn a lot more about each other compared to previously, and how they approach Silverstone is going to be very interesting, which we'll obviously talk about in our Silverstone preview, which will be coming up very soon. But I'd like to also quickly touch, I think we've gone through that incident rather thoroughly. We should also mention actually the proper race winner, George Russell, who obviously, yeah, he did get handed a race win, but obviously they're not going to care at all. And they were, as rightly said by Toto and everyone, they were in the position to pick up the pieces as it happened. And also, I'd like to mention Piastri as well. He's done probably a really good second driver role there of picking up a good amount of points when his teammate is out of the picture. And also getting a good amount of points on the sprint race. We haven't actually, it was 30 minutes into the episode, we have not mentioned the sprint race once. I guess because it was probably the bog standard compared to what we saw in the race. But Piastri doing very well there, getting second over his teammate Norris, picking up 7 points, just behind Verstappen in first place. So I think all of both, I guess you can say, to Russell and Piastri, and also Sainz as well in P3. I think they all did a very good job to be up there. And it was a great fight between those three, and especially Piastri, because I think he was closing in on Russell as well come the end. But obviously Russell was in that position in the end. So a very good day at the office, I'd say, for both of those two drivers.
I think if you're Piastri, you're actually quite disappointed you didn't get your first race win. I think had he not had his lap deleted in quali, I think he would have been P3, if I'm not mistaken, or P4, or at least up the top. And I think he had a good race. He obviously overtook Hamilton, overtook Sainz, was closing on Russell right at the end, and I think he would have been ultimately the one to pick up the pieces had he had a normal qualifying. But there's lots of if, buts, and maybes, and obviously Russell was the one that was there, and I think obviously it returns Mercedes to the top step of the podium where they've not been since Brazil 2 years ago now. And I think it's the strides they've made over the past few races have probably been equal to McLaren's last year, going from fairly middle of nowhere, like fourth best team, like consistent, like 7th, 8th, 6th, throughout the first few races, to now realistically on merit challenging for podiums with the Ferraris, with Piastri as well. And
turns out Toto actually does care compared to what we speculated on this podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, they're a good team. They develop well, and I think now they're getting a hand. They've kind of fully gotten rid of the old design concept that never really worked, and now they're getting a hang of obviously the new one, and now they are competing for that third place. And when Verstappen and Norris may have these issues, and I think now we've had one, could feel like another one is just on the horizon. You've got to be third. If you're third, you can get that win, and if you're if you're fourth, you can get fifth, you can get a podium as well, and like that's the best place they can be, I think, at the moment. They're not going to be challenging with Verstappen and Norris for the time being, so be that third place. And if they collide, you're there to pick up the pieces and ultimately get that race win.
No, I think that's fair enough. Maybe perhaps a bittersweet moment for Piastri with that in the back of his mind, but still a decent amount of points for McLaren in their kind of pursuit of, I guess, second place, maybe even first place. Who knows if Perez continues to be as bad as he is. He was in P7, which in this case was only 2 points behind, 2 places behind his teammate, but obviously for unforeseen circumstances. Couple of other honourable mentions. I just realised Ricciardo, bit under the radar, was P9, which is, I think, not a bad performance, judging where RB are and where he's been previously in the season. And Haas finishing P6 and P8. That, I think, is incredible from a team where literally we're at the bottom of nowhere come the end of last season. And who knew? Is it bad in saying that Gunther Steiner is actually a pretty bad team director of Haas, and the new person they got on, I don't even know what his name is, to be honest. But but they've done really well, and that's gotten them a very decent amount of points, and now they're into P7, possibly challenging RB for P6 in the constructors.
Yeah, that it's going to be interesting because I think Haas have actually sort of they've actually. I think I can't remember. I think was it this weekend or last weekend. They've actually have bought some upgrades in the last couple of races or so. So it obviously has seemed to work.
It worked.
Yeah. Obviously, the results are slightly inflated from the Norris Verstappen accident, but still, 6th and 8th place finish is still a very good result for Haas. Like you said, one of the best results in a very long time. And also, so I want to track back as well. This is actually the 3rd race in a row that Ricciardo has beaten Tsunoda.
Really?
Well.
That is... Yeah. Oh, not sure how that sits, personally.
Yeah.
I was quite enjoying Tsunoda being better than Ricciardo, but fair play to him. He's actually improved.
Because obviously,
come this stage of the season.
Yeah, because obviously Ricciardo finished 9th while Tsunoda was 14th. A bit of a anonymous race for Tsunoda. Then we go back to Spain where Ricciardo was 15th and Tsunoda was 19th. And then we go down to Canada, the race before that, where again Ricciardo finished in the points in 8th place, but then Tsunoda was 14th. So it really was Monaco the last time where Tsunoda actually beat Ricciardo, where Tsunoda finished at 8th place and Ricciardo was 12th. So,
Tsunoda had that spin in Canada, didn't he?
Yes, I believe so.
Will, didn't you say that Tsunoda should have been in the Red Bull? Am I correct in saying?
I stand by that. Well, he'll be doing better than Sergio Perez.
Yes, that is true, actually, yeah.
Verstappen had a puncture for half a lap, was trundling around, and still beat Perez by about 10 seconds. No, over 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
And Ricciardo was only 2 places off Perez in what is a significantly worse car. Probably the 7th best car on the grid, around that, compared to the best car on the grid, I'd say.
Perez is flirting with P7 in the Drivers' Championship.
He's 7 points off P7. He's now in P5. It's
insane, actually.
Yeah. He'd be doing a better job than Perez, but
Max is leading the drivers in the meantime with 81 points.
Yeah,
I know he said he could relax a bit since his new contract, but he's got he can't relax that much. He's got to perform a little bit, but I suppose we'll see how.
Maybe that's why Max took out Norris, to keep the gap in the Constructors' Championship larger.
Yeah, but perhaps it's the longer that Perez does this, the more it's becoming dangerously worrying, especially as Piastri is going to be up there. But can we think of any more honourable mentions? I think we've gone through quite a bit. Obviously, the top 3: Haas, Ricciardo, Alpine with another point. They've kind of, maybe not as much as what they would have wanted, but certainly over the past few races they've been all right. And then everyone else pretty much where we expect them to be. Another really disappointing race from Aston Martin. Again, they seem to have serious problems and dropping down the order. Stroll finishing ahead of Alonso, which is the more worrying thing. But
I think I saw their quali time was about 0.6 slower this year than it was last year, which is really weird. It shouldn't. I don't, obviously conditions and setup.
Can they just go back to their old car?
I don't know. Maybe not.
I don't know. Unless there's some regulations that are banning that, I'm not too sure. But it
must be some. I think there must be some regulations.
It's worrying signs.
Also, how did Norris win Driver of the Day? What's going on?
He would have secured that championship by now if there was a championship for Driver of the Day. He's just.
It should have been Nico Hülkenberg, realistically.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, honestly, even if Max Verstappen solved world hunger and end all global conflicts, he would still lose Driver of the Day to Lando Norris.
Yeah, that's very true. I think he's well, Norris is obviously a very popular driver with F1 fans, and so them seeing that collision probably had their votes decided. But we can say Nico Hülkenberg, if you're listening to this episode, you're our Driver of the Day. Do not worry. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So should we review our predictions?
Yes.
Wait,
none of us went Russell P1. We're really bad at this.
I've got the Will Kingswood curse now because I didn't pick, but I picked for Chinmay, obviously picking Verstappen, and that didn't happen. So yeah, not good at all, personally. Chinmay, do you have the predictions that I made? Okay, we'll tell you what. I'll send to you because I can read out Will Biddles. Unfortunately, Will Biddles couldn't be here today.
Yeah, that's fine.
But if we start off Will Kingswood with you can run through it first. Again, if you haven't listened to the episodes before, we basically do a format where you're not allowed to choose the same person for P1, and everyone takes it in turns for who gets to pick first. Basically, who gets to pick Verstappen. And it was Chinmay's term, so obviously, Will, you couldn't pick Verstappen P1. So did you want to run through your top 5 of who you went for?
Yes, I almost nailed it had they not collided, because I went Norris and Verstappen P1 and P2. Obviously, Norris DNF, Verstappen P5, so that's just 1 point there. Then the rest of my top 5 were Hamilton, who finished P4, but I put in P3, so another point there. Leclerc, who he just was out of it right at the start of the race, not really his fault there. Obviously finished, I think, 11th in the end, but outside the top 5. And then I went for Sainz P5, who ended up in P3. So that's 3 points from the top 5, not my greatest performance. My 1 point prediction was someone gets eliminated from quali by a track limits deletion. I don't think that happened. I can't remember anyone dropping down into the bottom 5 because they got their lap deleted. Actually, track limits this year were great. Everyone was very well behaved for most of it.
Well, and we've seen though, because there were some drivers which the gravel was a big problem for them, mainly Tsunoda in Q1, who obviously showed why they're there and why everyone's got to be so treacherous. But I think on you saying that, I'm pretty sure Piastri's the only one that I can really remember who significantly dropped down because of track limits. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, so not that one. 2 point prediction. I went for an overtake for the lead on merit. I don't know how we feel about this.
Well, there was an overtake. I mean, after the first incident, Norris did get, or was it his first or second incident? He did get by, but then Verstappen re-overtook in turn 4. So I'd say that's valid.
Okay, if you two are willing to give it to me,
it's valid.
Cool. So that's 2 points there. And then I said closest ever top 10 in qualifying, which didn't happen. Verstappen was 4/10 ahead of everyone else. But it was, I'm not claiming these points, but it was the closest ever top 20. Closest ever gap between P1 and P20 in Q1.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
But so that is no points for the 1, no points for the 3, but the 2 point prediction making 5 points. That might be the worst weekend I've had this
5 points. 5 points in total from you.
Yeah, 5 points in total.
Oh, okay. So you're on 68. That's we shall see how everyone else does. So Chinmay is going to be reading out the predictions that I made for him. Hopefully, I've done well. I picked Verstappen P1, so I've already kind of failed there.
Yeah.
But So how did I do for you?
It actually wasn't the worst considering what happened. Obviously, Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Sainz would be along the lines of what I would have gone with anyway. So, so obviously Verstappen, Norris crashed up, and Verstappen did still end up P5, so you still get still retrieve a point from there. Russell won, so we get another point from there. Hamilton was actually in the correct position. He did finish 4th. That's the 3 points there. And the other one was Carlos Sainz. So actually we pick up 6 points from the top 5.
6 points from the top 5.
Which, considering what happened, I would actually take that, to be honest. The one point it was that someone would hit the gravel in turn 4 at some point in the weekend. I'm pretty sure it did happen.
That did happen, yeah.
Piastri was forced off at the start.
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
Perez.
Oh, yeah, by Perez, yeah.
Yeah. Then the second one was that Perez does not reach Q3, which I believe
That
No, he
did happen. He did happen unexpectedly, but he did do that.
Yes. And then the third one was no dry tyres on the race.
Yeah. Yeah, that didn't happen.
But I think
Yeah.
it was. I think it was had the same dryness as the Sahara. So
Yeah, it wasn't. But still, so how many points is that for you, Chinmay?
that is 7 points.
7 points. So, to be fair, that puts Chinmay on 69 points, just 1 point ahead of Will Kingswood. So, still very close at the top.
And how
I'll
far
read
ahead
out.
is...
Well, we'll find out how far ahead Will Builders is. So I'll run through his. Obviously, again, unfortunately, he couldn't be here. But so he went with first place Leclerc. Obviously, he was in P11, so that's no points. Verstappen second. He thought that was a possibility. So he obviously only got P5. Norris in P3. Again, he retired. Hamilton, he did also put in P4, which is a exactly correct position, so that's 3 points for that. And Sainz, he put P5, which he obviously finished P3, so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points from his top 5. His 1 point prediction was at least one car forced off the track at turn 3. That certainly did happen in the race. Second 2 point prediction was 3+ drivers have laps deleted in qualifying. I don't think that happened. Again, we've already mentioned Piastri. Oh no, but didn't Hamilton? Did Hamilton have it, or was that for the sprint qualifying?
Hamilton might have been for sprint qualifying. Might have to go back and look at that, but I think it was 1 or 2. I don't.
We'll go back and look at that. I don't think it was 3, so we'll say no for now. We'll review that maybe. And then 3 point prediction was there's a crash caused by the new gravel trap at any point in the weekend. Well, there wasn't a crash. There wasn't a... Well, okay, there was a crash. But it wasn't to do with the new gravel trap. So no one retired because of that.
No, I think a crash is into the barriers as opposed to a spin.
Yes, yeah. No, I don't think... No, so no one went into the barrier. Obviously, Tsunoda did manage to keep it on the track and just ended up driving straight back onto the track. So that was fine from him. So I'd say that's also nothing from him there.
So that's 6 points.
So that's 6 points from him as well. So the updated scoreline is, again, very close. So Will Bidders ahead on 70, Chinmay on 69, and Will Kingswood on 68.
We're
Really incredibly close. Yeah, well, consistent. Yeah, consistent. I'll give you that. I'm not sure if it's consistently good or consistently bad, but
we're Perez consistent. How about that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very true. But yeah, I think that's our predictions done. We shall be making some new predictions as we always do in our Britain preview, which will be coming out very, very soon. But apart from that, do we have anything else that we thought we've forgotten to mention? I think we've done pretty well there, haven't we, in reviewing all things there. So yes, thank you very much for tuning in once again, and until next time, goodbye.